artistically and performatively. At variance with the victimized Melanie, who submits to the swan's will, Feathers embodies the phallic swan with her fantastic wings. She stands for Kérchy's model of the new woman who combines both female and masculine traits to defy the gender classifications and to show that, femaleness and maleness are constructed to show that femaleness and gender divisions are culturally inherited rather than naturally acquired. Introducing herself to the American journalist Walzer, she says, I quote from Nights at the Circus, "Not building the Cockney Venice for nothing, sir, though they would just have called me Helen of the High Wire, due to the unusual circumstances in which I come ashore. For I never docked with what you might call the normal channel, sir. Oh, dear me, not but just like Helen of the Troy was hatched out of a bloody great egg," end of quote. According to the Greek myth, Helen of the Troy is the daughter of Almighty Jove, who raped Leda. In the magic toy shop, Carter metamorphoses the swan into a more tolerant creature, while in Nights at the Circus, she strengthens the mythic female Helen of the Troy into a powerful woman who overcomes the gender boundaries as delineated by the patriarchal order. The same physical characteristics of the mythical swan are intertextually borrowed to design Feathers. This is to show that power relations are variable and gender roles are interchangeable. Besides, Feathers can be studied as the male mythic figure himself through the appropriation of the wings and the name that alludes to her feathered female body. I quote, she says, "Evidently this Helen took after her putative father, the swan, around the shoulder parts," end of quote. This ironic description of Feathers explicitly confirms the writer's aspiration to borrow the swan's physical features together with those of Helen of the Troy to design Feathers. As a transgendered character, empowering the mythic female victim by acquiring the physical might of the victimizer is in itself a feminist postmodern step towards mythic debunking. Feathers combines the name of the raped female figure and the physical power of the mythic rapist, whereby trespassing the traditional gender boundaries. The deconstruction of myths is a feminist way of asserting their own feminine writing. The demolition of the Greek mythology of Leda and the Swan stands as one example amongst the various patriarchal amongst the various patriarchal methods that are needed to suppress women's identities, their rights, and distinguish a style of writing. The feminist retaliation is conspicuous through their opposition of metaphysics at all levels. Written at the end of the 19th century, the novel presents Feathers as the authentic new woman with her metaphorical wings, which help her to surmount the patriarchal world and to break the mythic chains. As Ma Nelson, her foster mother, informs her that she is, I quote, "the pure child of the century that just now is waiting in the wings, the new age in which no women will be bound to the ground," end of quote. Her wings enable her to soar over the previously Victorian limitations and mythic boundaries that have anchored the superiority of men over women. As such, Feathers, with her past female generations and questions the myth of women's sexual passivity by acquiring the wings of the swan, which grant her vigor to evade all male sexual assaults. Oh, really? Oops, so I'll conclude. I'll try to be concise. I'll move on to the conclusion. To conclude, this presentation has endeavored to study Carter's feminist postmodern project of demythologizing, which has attempted to deconstruct the Greek myth of Leda and the Swan by exposing its patriarchal roots. Carter's innovation is revealed by her debunking of the myth via the creation of a counter-parody myth. The first part has concentrated on the deconstruction of the myth in the magic toy shop, while highlighting the feminist postmodern achievement to set equal female and male characters working to demolish Uncle Philip's mythic world. At the outset of the novel, Carter fools the reader by portraying the mythic successful functioning only to debunk it later on by fully deconstructing it. What's innovative as far as Carter's demythologizing writing is concerned is the role performance plays in demolishing the myth and shaping the characters' identities and gender. The second part of this presentation has attempted to study Carter's feminist mythic deconstruction in the Circus. Well, in this novel, the writer goes on to design a typical feminist demythologizing plan by underscoring the preeminence of performance in constructing gender and identity of the characters. Carter's pioneer work is showcased in the twist of events and exchange of gender features. While in the first book she debunks and parodies the physical attributes of the swan, in the second she adopts the very same traits to conceive her heroine feathers. It might appear paradoxical to achieve the deconstruction of a myth by creating a new one, but her re-mythologizing is meant to be self-debunking by the end of the novel, only to justify her claim that myths are patriarchal lies created to ensnare women and anchor male superiority in the human consciousness. Carter's groundbreaking creation of feathers, despite its re-mythologizing nature, contributes to unveil the ideological essence of myths. Her radical feminist project is exhibited in the revolutionary continuity between both novels, with a common goal, that of mythic deconstruction. Thank you.
Thanks, Wiem. Do you need any help with that? Oh, I'll bring over. Our third speaker is Dr. Elizabeth Howard, who is online. Hello. You are an instructor at the University of Oregon, and your interests include French and Scandinavian fairy tales, gender studies, children's literature, and translation studies, among other things. Oh, thank you. Yes, please start. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It's my first time presenting on Teams, so hopefully it will all go smoothly. Can everyone see? Let's see. Can you all out there see my PowerPoint slide that says the Rewilding of Fairy?
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Then I'll begin. Just a quick word of thank you so much to the conference organizers and to all the incredible speakers today. I'm bummed that I wasn't able to be here for the first half of the conference, but I'm hoping to catch up on the recording later because there's so many incredible talks. So I think my paper will have a lot in common with many of the things that have been spoken about today, and in particular Anna's paper earlier. So it's going to be exciting to see the different overlaps. So the title of my paper is The Rewilding of Fairy, Queer Desires in Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber. So Angela Carter's 1979 collection of feminist fairy tales, The Bloody Chamber, was published at a time when a popular view among feminist scholars was that fairy tales should be abandoned as structures so deeply bound up with misogyny and the oppression of women that it was impossible to disentangle them from their patriarchal origins. However, other feminist scholars, Angela Carter among them, argued that in fact it was more radical to use the old oppressive structures and rework them from the inside out. As Carter wrote, "I am all for putting new wine in old bottles, especially if the pressure of the new wine makes the bottles explode." And explode them she did. In her collection of 10 retold fairy tales, Carter reimagines the landscape of the fairy tale in a sensual ornamental style that both amplifies aspects found in earlier versions of the tales, but also critiques their patriarchal and heteronormative aspects to give voice instead to a feminist, and as I will argue today, queer vision of human sexuality and desire. Key to Carter's queer representation of sexuality and desire is her depiction of human relationships with the natural world and the creative and sexual potential found in the wild. By depicting the vibrant living presence of nature through non-human characters who engage in intimate relationships with human characters, Carter's postmodern fairy tales invite a deeper engagement in our relationship with the natural world, even if those encounters are often unpredictable, chaotic, and charged with danger. Two tales in particular illustrate the ways in which Carter's depictions of wild beings and spaces articulate queer desires and relationships. In The Tiger's Bride and The Earl King, Carter's depiction of human encounters with the wild offer powerful ways to think through otherness and marginality by illustrating the possibility of not only reciprocity across species, but also transformation. Her focus on sexuality, and in particular the sensuality of animals and the natural world, makes possible a queer imaginary in which equality is established between humans and animals. In the last few years, wildness has become a topic of interest in queer scholarship, evidenced by Jack Halberstam's 2020 book, Wild Things, The Desire of Disorder, as well as the July 2018 issue of South Atlantic Quarterly, which had wildness as its central theme. In their introduction to the issue, Jack Halberstam and Tavia Nyong'o articulate the powerful resonances between queerness and wildness. They write, "Wildness has certainly functioned as a foil to civilization, as the dumping ground for all that white settler colonialism has wanted to declare expired, unmanageable, undomesticated, and politically unruly. For us, that makes wildness all the more appealing. Like another problematic term, queer, wildness names, while rendering partially opaque, what hegemonic systems would interdict or push to the margins. Associations between queerness and otherness, and thus queerness and animality or monstrosity, have been made by queer scholars before. In their position of wildness, however, Halberstam and Nyong'o name the forces in the natural world and also in queerness that give these marginal categories their particular power. As they write, wildness is where the environment speaks back, where communication bows to intensity, where worlds collide, cultures clash, and things fall apart. In other words, wildness is when those entities that have been silenced, dehumanized, and pushed to the margins finally gain the opportunity to speak. Wildness, like queerness, can bring confusion, chaos, disruption, and unpredictability, but also, potentially, pleasure and play. As queer scholars interested in investigating the concept of wildness in relation to queerness, Halberstam and Nyong'o state that one of their intentions is, quote, the rewilding of theory, which they explain proceeds from an understanding that first encounters with wildness are intimate and bewilder all sovereign expectations of autonomous selfhood. To be wild in this sense is to be beside oneself, to be internally incoherent, to be driven by forces seen and unseen, to hear in voices and to speak in tongues. This internal incoherency that they describe, as well as the evaporation of autonomous selfhood that takes place in intimate encounters with the wild, are both elements we can see in the androgynous and often hybrid human-animal characters in Carter's tales, and in their relationship with one another throughout the Bloody Chamber. In Carter's collection of dark feminist fairy tales, the boundaries between the human characters and the natural environments they encounter blur and bleed together until human and animals become indistinguishable from one another. This is most noticeable in the stories that feature human and animal relationships, where desire and sensuality unite the human and animal lovers, in encounters that elide difference and subvert the binary associations that usually cluster around the categories of animal and human, as well as man and woman. Among others, as I'm thinking here of Anna's presentation helps so well to point this out as well. Such is the case in Carter's story, The Tiger's Bride, which subverts the message found in earlier versions of the Beauty and the Beast tale, including Beaumont's well-known 1756 version, by altering the ending. Instead of the beast transformation back into a human at the end of the story, Carter's version ends with the human beauty's magnificent transformation into a beast. The reasons for this are highly political. In spite of initially being sold to the beast to pay her father's gambling debts, Beauty ultimately chooses to join the beast of her own volition as an act of solidarity. The beast is seen as a monster because he is not human, hiding his animal features behind a mask painted with a man's face. Beauty recognizes him and all members of the animal kingdoms as fellow victims in a patriarchal system that denies women and animals humanity. As the protagonist herself tells us, I was a young girl, a virgin, and therefore men denied me rationality just as they denied it to all those who were not exactly like themselves, in all their unreason. If I could see not one single soul in that wilderness of desolation around me, then the six of us, mounts and riders both, could boast among us not one soul either, since all the best religions in the world state categorically that not beasts nor women were equipped with the flimsy, insubstantial things when the good Lord opened the gates of Eden and let Eve and her familiars tumble out. The protagonist feels a sense of connection with the two ostracized figures of the beast and his valet because they, like she, have been othered by the realm of men. Thus, in the patriarchal world of masculine ideals, she is denied humanity just as much as they are. This burgeoning sense of kinship between the protagonist and the beast is later strengthened by the beast's decision to reveal his true nature to her in a gesture of mutuality. After she is taken to the beast's palazzo, his valet explains that all his master wants is to see the girl naked one time. Then she will be free of her debt. Insulted by the request, she refuses and is gratified by the single tear he sheds in response. A tear, I hoped, of shame, she tells us. The beast's shameful tear over his desires and the protagonist's refusal to submit to them demonstrates how both characters reject the stereotypes the patriarchal world expects of them. As both man and animal, the patriarchal ideal would expect the beast to exhibit a monstrous and domineering sexuality, taking what he wants by force if refused. And the young virginal protagonist would be expected to cower before him and submit to his will. Instead, the beast hides his body and is ashamed of his desires, expressing his vulnerability and sensitivity through the tear that he sheds, while the young sexually innocent girl is bold enough to refuse what she considers to be a demeaning offer. These patriarchal associations are further undermined when the beast asks if he may unmask himself for the protagonist, demonstrating his desire for reciprocity between them. Although she is terrified by the prospect, she agrees, and what she sees when the beast finally reveals himself to her makes the shared sense of kinship between them all the more powerful. His appearance affects her so deeply that she feels her breast, quote, ripped apart as if I suffered a marvelous wound. The description of the beast that follows is distinctly sensual. A great feline tawny shape whose pelt was barred with a savage geometry of bars the color of burned wood. His domed heavy head, so terrible he must hide it. How subtle the muscles, how profound the tread. The annihilating vehemence of his eyes like twin suns. When the valley moves to cover his master again, she stops him with an audible no, noting the size and heraldic strength of the animal before her, concluding with apparent satisfaction, nothing about him reminded me of humanity. It is indeed this resolute lack of humanity that renders him appealing to her as a lover, and what leads to her own willingness to bear herself to him as well. Even though she still experiences that ancient human fear, she chooses to stay with the beast not in spite of his animal nature, but because of it. She sheds the trappings of her humanity by removing her clothing, even if it is difficult, as she is unaccustomed to nakedness, and the process leaves her feeling as if she is stripping away her own skin. And though the process may be painful, it is a pain she is willing to endure because it means she can leave behind the commodified human world, where as a woman she is valued only for the cold white meat of her flesh, where the eyes that watch you take no account of your existence. Instead, she embraces the wild in all of its savagery, irrationality, and potential danger, because she knows that there she will be treated as an equal. Thus, abandoning the ornaments of her human femininity, except for a pair of diamond earrings given to her by the beast, she goes to the beast's room and finds him in his true form. She is able to see past the human myths that have informed her perception of him, and beneath the wildness of his exterior, she perceives his vulnerability. As she tells us, he was far more frightened of me than I was of him. Squatting naked before him, she stretches out her hand to show him she's unafraid, demonstrating to him once again that she is meeting him on equal terms. It is this equality that is the foundation of the wordless pact they make together. He approaches her and begins to lick her with a tongue as abrasive as sandpaper, and I know we've already heard this quote today, but it's so incredible that I'm going to read it again. Each stroke of his tongue ripped off the skin after successive skin, all the skins of a life in the world, and left behind a nascent patina of shining hairs. My earrings turned back to water and trickled down my shoulders. I shrugged the drops off my beautiful fur. In losing her human skin, she is thus reborn as an animal. Her transformation is so absolute that even the diamond earrings she wears, material markers of the wealth and economic interests of men, are transformed too, signaling her freedom from a system that values her only for the purity of her human flesh. Her liberation from the system is underscored by her final gesture of shrugging the drops away. They are insignificant to her now, just as insignificant as the world of men to which she no longer belongs. Thus, her transformation initiates her into a world where she can escape the dominant patriarchal ideas encoded in the traditional fairy tale. However, her transformation does not only represent a rejection of patriarchy, it also demonstrates her acceptance of a more expansive form of sexuality, in which desire for the animal, for the non-human, shatters the patriarchal norms that dictate and delimit sexual desire. The protagonist's decision to enter into an erotic union with the beast is queer in the sense that it embraces pleasure in and solidarity with a being whose worth is not recognized by heterosexist patriarchy. Her sexual desires alone would make the relationship a queer one, but her transformation into a tiger herself illustrates a more profound acceptance of the non-human and everything it represents. Her transformation also makes literal queer perceptions of identity and desire as entities that are shifting and multiple. I would like to point to one last example from the Bloody Chamber that offers a compelling demonstration of the question of the wild, as is represented in Carter's retold fairy tales. As we have seen, Carter does not shy away from sexuality in her writing. Instead, she foregrounds it, making explicit the erotic currents that lie under the surface of fairy tales. In no story is the erotic charge of the natural world more evident than in The Earl King, where the seductive appeal of the wild is both intoxicating and also potentially deadly. In the story, an I-speaking voice is summoned into the depths of the woods to sleep with the eldritch Earl King, who is represented, again, as Anna has told us earlier, as the living embodiment of the forest, described by the narrator as coming, quote, alive from the desire of the woods. He lures the speaker to him with his whistle he fashions out of an elder twig, like the neck in Swedish ballads, who ensnares his victim with the music from his fiddle, or the enchanted pipes played by fairies in Irish folktales. His erotic appeal is rendered exclusively in the sensual terms of the dense woodland kingdom over which he rules. In one of their erotic encounters, the narrator describes him thus. His skin is the tint and texture of sour cream. He has stiff russet nipples, ripe as berries. Like a tree that bears bloom and fruit on the same bough together. How pleasing, how lovely. In its associations with the natural world, his erotic appeal is deeply androgynous, as represented in this moment of comparison between his skin and a flowering tree. The image of a male lover being likened to a tree that bears not only blossom but fruit queers our perception of the cisgendered male body recognized by heterosexist patriarchy. The queer feminine imagery of the Earl King's fruitful body is also clearly pleasing to the female protagonist, whose perspective we are most closely aligned with in the text. How pleasing, how lovely, she tells us in her aside. Carter's ability to evoke the erotic and sensual components of the natural world queers the gender dynamics of sex, while also challenging the divide that separates humans from nature. In the Earl King, we can see the same transformative logic at work that we saw in The Tiger's Bride, in which the magic of the fairy tale makes it possible for a girl to change into a tiger and her diamond earrings to turn to water. In the shifting transformative fabric of the fairy tale universe, anything is possible. The boundaries and distinctions melt away, and metaphor becomes literal. This shifting, ambiguous quality is true of the Earl King himself, who is both male and female, domestic and wild, human and animal, innocent and deadly, all at the same time. The protagonist tells us how he lives in the heart of the woods, surrounded by animals, living off the bounty of the woodland, thanks to his intimate knowledge of the place. But for all of his wildness, he has a domestic side. He makes soft cheese from the milk provided by his goat. He weaves reeds into baskets and keeps his rustic home spick and span because, as the protagonist tells us, quote, he is an excellent housewife. But for as much as he represents life, material richness, and abundance, death is never far behind. As she tells us, a little of the cold air that blows over graveyards always goes with him. The protagonist likens him to a mushroom, the kind that spring up overnight in lightless places and thrive on dead things. And his lethal intentions towards the protagonist are evident in one of the earliest paragraphs of the story, when the eerie refrain makes its first appearance. Earl King will do you grievous harm. Thus, we see that the relationship is as ambiguous as the Earl King himself, who the protagonist recognizes as both captor, lover, and potential killer. Her descriptions of their erotic interludes are full of desire and sensual wonder, as well as allusions to his inseparability from the woods he inhabits. The earth, with its fragile fleece of last summer's dying leaves and grasses, supports me only out of complicity with him, because his flesh is of the same substance as those leaves that are slowly turning into earth. Just as the decomposition of leaves eventually yields new growth, so the powers of creation and destruction exist side by side in her supernatural lover. We can see this in another moment between the two lovers that conveys in vivid detail the myriad of shifting contradictions the Earl King embodies. His skin covers me entirely. We are like two halves of a seed, enclosed in the same integument. I should like to grow enormously small, so that you could swallow me, like those queens in fairy tales who conceive when they swallow a grain of corn or a sesame seed. Then I could lodge inside your body, and you would bear me. Here, the Earl King's already androgynous gender is further queered by his lover's erotic desire to be swallowed by him and born from his body like a child. This association of the Earl King with the life-giving powers of the womb echo his powers as the living embodiment of the natural world, in which birth and death materially haunt his forest bower. In the figure of the Earl King, the trope of Mother Earth is thus reimagined as a mushroom-picking, pleasure-giving, feral goblin king. Just like the protagonist in The Tiger's Bride, the protagonist in The Earl King also experiences the embraces of her supernatural lover as possessing transformative power. He strips me to my last nakedness, that underskin of mauve pearlized satin, like a skinned rabbit, then dresses me again in an embrace so lucid and encompassing it might be made of water, and shakes over me dead leaves, as if into this stream I have become. In the figure of the Earl King, Angela Carter therefore succeeds in creating a character that embodies all of the dangerous and pleasurable contradictions of the wild, and all of the transformative possibilities that embracing the wild can entail. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That was really interesting. Wiem, do you want to come back up in case there's any questions? Anna, you have your hand up. Is that a question for this session? I'll put my hand up somehow. Don't know how to do that.
I put that up accidentally, but in fact, I can have a question to Elizabeth. So I was wondering, like, whether there are any animals. I don't know, but I hear a very strong echo. So like which are particularly used in queer symbology or as metaphors of queer desires in contemporary art or literature, or in general, I mean, beyond Carter's fictional oeuvre as well.
Can you ask your question one more time? I was also hearing the echo.
Okay, so any animals which are just really like this very readily associated as symbols or metaphors of queer desires.
Oh, that's such a good question.
In contemporary literature or art, because in popular culture you have the rainbow-colored unicorn, right? But I was wondering if there are like any typical like animal figures which could be recurring in contemporary arts or literature.
That's such a great question. I have to think about it because nothing is jumping to my mind. Now that you mentioned unicorn, of course, that's definitely like all over the place. Rainbows and unicorns. I'll have to think about it if there are other animals that reappear in kind of queer symbology. That's a great question.
Okay, is there any questions? Yeah.
Hi, Elizabeth. Sorry, the question was for you. I was wondering if you had heard or read or already looked at Malinda Lo's Ash, which is a retelling of Cinderella. Because I just wanted to know your opinion about it, but I can see links between her writing and Carter's writing. But if you know about it, then I just want to hear what you would have to say.
Yeah, I'm so thank you for that reference. I definitely have read Malinda Lo's Ash. I remember really loving it. I read it several years ago now, so I don't remember all the details except being very excited about the idea of a queer retelling of Cinderella. There's so many like exciting things going on in especially young adult literature right now in terms of queer fairy tale retellings. But also one of my favorites, I don't know if she's been named today, I guess this isn't young adult, but one of my very favorites is Emma Donohue's collection, Kissing the Witch. Some of her sort of queer rewritings of Snow White and all the tales in that volume are really incredible. But yeah, I'm definitely a fan of Malinda Lo, and I think there's even a sequel to it, Huntress, and I think I read the sequel. But yes, definitely a big fan. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Sorry, Alex in the chat has commented on queer culture animals. And is there any more questions from anyone? Because if not, I will hand over to Naomi for the closing words. I think maybe that's the end of it.
I'd quite like to know a bit more about Angela Carter. Sorry, I've just been coughing and sneezing, so sorry. Just get my breath back. Yes, I'd just like to know more about Angela Carter's studies in Tunisia and also about folkloric studies as well, and perhaps creative writers in Tunisia now doing this kind of work. People we should be knowing about or wanting to get in translation.
Thank you. Well, as an English teacher, okay, in Tunisia I teach English literature, you see, and we teach English literary heritage. I was taught Angela Carter by my American supervisor, Dr. Edward Sklapovic, and then I started my MA studies in Angela Carter to see, and there are many students actually who are right now studying Angela Carter's feminist postmodern writing, especially the rewriting of fairy tales, okay, which actually is very interesting, you see, since it unveils the patriarchal ideological, implications, okay, through writing these fairy tales, those of Charles Perrault, for example, we have seen today, okay, we have seen many analysis of the rewriting of Charles Perrault, okay, and the divergence of their ideological patriarchal implications, you see. So we are studying English literature, we are studying, many writers, many English writers in the English department. We have many departments of English literature in Tunisia, whether in our Faculty of Arts and Humanities of Sousse or in Tunis. We have at least 4 or 5 faculties too, in Sfax, everywhere, you see. Yeah, we have actually...
Well, the next Angela Carter conference will be in Tunisia then.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, welcome, of course. Yeah, why not? Yeah, actually, I'm supervising 2 students working on Angela Carter right now. Yeah, 2 MA students.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is for Anna and for Wiem. Because you've both spoken, obviously, and you are in 2 different countries, I wondered whether sort of your students, Wiem and Anna, if Carter is known more in English, as in her original language, or whether it's known more or studied more in translation.
Do you read Angela Carter? As in your students, do they read her in English? Do they read her in
Yeah, of
French?
course, they read it in English. No,
Okay.
they are English students, okay? We study everything in English, okay? We have multiple subjects, not only literature, of course, we have civilizations, translation, grammar, everything, you see? English literature, culture, and civilization, see? They are specialized in English literature and civilization, everything in English, see? Sorry? Yeah, we have translation too, yeah. Yeah, we study translation, different types of translation, business translation, literary translations too.
Do people read Angela Carter in translation?
No, it's not a translation. Yeah, in the native language now. We read Angela Carter in the English language, you see, and we use, of course, critical books in English and everything in English. We buy books from Amazon and everything we have there. You see, yeah.
It's encouraging because here I have undergraduate students who say they find it too difficult. So it's very encouraging.
No, it is very interesting. I actually reading Angela Carter and writing on Angela Carter is very interesting. And right now, as I have said, okay, many students are interested in Angela Carter in our faculty. And actually, I intend to teach it next year, okay, in their curriculum as a subject. You see, instead of having other, for instance. Writers instead of studying other English writers, we intend to program Angela Carter for next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And given Natsumi's keynote, I think that's a really,
So we really have.
I think it's really nice to kind of bookend.
Sorry, I don't think I'm right. Well, yeah. Sorry. Anna.
What? So that's which one in?
So we do have Angela Carter in translation. At our university classes, we read them in English, but very often we also refer to Hungarian translations. And then the text is good, but you can see that this is the cover of The Bloody Chamber, which is translated as The Chamber of Pain. And the cover image also suggests that this is something that has to do with horror stories. So it's not necessarily the rewritten fairy tale genre and this sort of feminist erotica, but really this more of a gothic, dark fantasy. And actually the very first publication of Carter in Hungarian translation was in a selection of short stories that presented contemporary horror fiction like Stephen King. So there was this kind of a context. But unfortunately, not much of her work is translated into Hungarian. We have Nights at the Circus that was translated by a university professor, and it's really marvelous how Favers's very specific language is somehow transported into a Hungarian dialect, and it's really beautifully crafted language-wise. But these are the only two texts that we have, so the Bloody Chamber and Nights at the Circus. But I would say that all these kind of central aspects of the narrative that we could associate with queering, or that we could associate with like violating or transgressing all sorts of this kind of a conventional hierarchical boundaries is definitely there in the Hungarian translations too. Hungarian is a very poetic language, so you can definitely play with these allusions or these rhetorics that Carter has in her text.
So I was going to say that it's unfortunate that you often miss our audience's reactions. They really enjoyed the idea of the Chamber of Pain. We needed House of Pain. That's the band. The Chamber in Pain, was that it? Yeah, we really enjoyed it. And yeah, sorry, I feel like the speakers have missed those. You have made us laugh and take gasps of breath, and it's missed out because of the muting. So, so if there's no more questions, then I think I'll hand over to Naomi for our closing words, if that's all right, Naomi. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to everyone who's come today, who wasn't speaking. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to our last panel. I think that just made a wonderful bookend with Natsumi's opening keynote, this idea of Angela Carter as the global literature author. And as I was saying, I think I was off mic, but some of my undergraduate students here find Angela Carter's language too difficult. So it's very encouraging to hear that that's not the case elsewhere, although perhaps difficult for translation. I also want to give a huge thank you to Heather Robbins, whose idea this conference was, whose poster design this was, a stunning poster. I think we all, in this world where we're living more and more under Big Brother, I think it's really great to have Angela Carter as our big sister looking out for us. And I'd like to also thank, oh, yes, before, let's do that.
I don't want to interrupt your ending.
Well, if you do it now, because I think I'm going to end on a note about Ukraine, basically.
Okay.
So if you want to do that now, that would be great.
It was briefly just to say that there is the Angela Carter Essay Awards, and we've extended the deadline to the end of April, 29th. And there's a £100 prize for best postgraduate essay, and there is a £50 prize for the best other published chapter or journal article. And the information about how to contribute is on our website, which is angelacartersociety.com. And you have to be a member of the Angela Carter Society, but it's very cheap, and it goes towards helping at the annual conference, which is happening in France this year in June. Hope to see some of you there. And yeah, thank you so much for the conference on behalf of the Angela Carter Society. It's been really amazing, really, really high level of discussion. And I'll shut up and let you finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and to the Society. And I'm going to be in Bristol on your walk as soon as I can get there. I wanted to just also thank Natsumi for her words about Ukraine. You know, speaking to us from a country that's known, you know, nuclear detonations. I thought that was very powerful and compassionate. And I know that we all felt it in our hearts. I was looking back at Angela Carter as, you know, as a curator of fairy tales. I wanted to also thank Martine. Enardite de la Rochère, and for her help early on in the process of the of organizing the conference, but also for the remark today about, you know, we're trying to shoehorn too many, you know, contemporary issues into Carter's work. And I thinking about that, my feeling was going back to Beulah, to the unconscious. That although she was just, you know, cognitively, you know, just spinning razor blades. You know, she's also, you know, unconsciously, she opened herself up to the world, and you know, through her reading of fairy tales, through her reading of newspapers, how hugely informed she was. But it was sinking in, and so I think that when we see these themes, you know, ecological themes in her work, I think it's because you know, there was a lot going on for her that she wouldn't have been consciously aware of, and that as human beings we don't change that much. We haven't changed that much in hundreds of thousands of years, and so we can all, you know, it resonates down through time, those themes. Armageddon had happened in North America with the arrival of the Europeans, you know, so Armageddon isn't a new theme. So I went back to her fairy tales, and there were no Ukrainian fairy tales that I could find in this book, but I found a Russian fairy tale that deals with brothers. I won't read it, I'm just going to quote from it. It's two brothers, one rich and one poor, and I think I think that the Russians and the Ukrainians would relate to that, that image. And the rich brother tricks the younger brother into giving up his foal. And the case hinges on a riddle. And the older brothers, the richer brothers, mother gives him, you know, very sort of logical answers to the riddle, very conventional answers. And the poor brother sheds bitter tears and goes home, and he says to his 7-year-old daughter, and the story is called The Wise Little Girl. He tells her the riddle, and she says, "Father, go to the Tsar and tell him that the strongest and fastest thing in the world is the wind. The fattest is the earth, for she feeds everything that grows and lives. The softest of all is the hand, for whatever a man may lie on, he puts his hand under his head. And there is nothing lovelier in the world than sleep." So reflecting on that, I think Putin should know that the fortunes of Tsars can change with the wind. I think the earth is being protected. There are water saviors, water keepers. There are, you know, it's happening. The earth is being saved. The earth will nurture us. We all are reaching out our hands, if we can, to those in need, and there'll be more and more people in need over the coming years. And we all need to rest and repair and for the coming floods. And we will do that together. And we will do that armed with the cauldron of stories and with the love and respect that we have for each other. So thank you all very much for making this such an incredibly beautiful day that fulfilled, absolutely surpassed my dreams for it. So thank you all. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to stop recording. Yeah, taking the mic.
Yeah, I've taken the mic.
And I'm just going to close the meeting, but thank you all so much, and I'll make sure that you get the videos. And something else that I need to do. I've made a list, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. And just feel free to email me if you need anything else. Oh, and a copy of the chat will also accompany the video links. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been an amazing day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It's been brilliant. Lovely to see everyone online as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.